So, normally on Red Planet, we start the show with a funny little cold open, but I think that it would be prescient and poignant this week to remind everyone that it is Eid and that there are millions of Muslims all over the world who cannot celebrate Eid with their friends and family. They may have lost friends and family in places like Gaza, the West Bank, Sudan. So we start this episode with a very somber and very serious Eid Mubarak to all. Welcome to Red Planet.
Hey,
How
everyone.
is it going? Good to see you all. Sophie,
Yes, Mule.
let's start the show with the thing that we always start the show with, which is what is the most base thing that you did this week?
Sure. I've had a bit of a shit week. Ongoing irritating harassment. I talked about on previous weeks, people being unpleasant. But I had a very nice birthday gathering with some friends, and in light of stuff having been really shit for me in the last few months, it's not a base thing that I did, but it's a nice thing that happened, and I've got a way that I'll explain it links in. Um, my girlfriend presented me with a jar of lovely notes from people in my life, just saying nice things about how much they value me and how much they love me, and it made me feel very loved and held. And it had little fairy lights and a solar powered thing in the cap so that it lights up when it gets dark. And it had some notes in there from people who I hadn't heard from, and I wasn't sure I was going to hear from again, and made me cry a lot when I read all of them this morning. And that was absolutely lovely. And as I say, this isn't a thing that I did. And it doesn't seem like based and political and revolutionary and whatever, but my girlfriend said that she knows about it through through being involved in organizing, and that it's something that, she's seen done, has had done for her or whatever. And like, it's a reminder that community and supporting each other is a based thing. And there are lots of ways that you can show compassion for people and be there for each other and for people who you are supporting through difficult times, that like they are based, because like, of course, right, it's not always like we defeat a landlord or a boss or whatever, though we like to focus on that news. Sometimes it's just like being there for someone. I think last week I was talking about, supporting a friend who broke her ankle. Similarly, like, yeah, just that, like, it made me fucking cry my eyes out, seeing how much I'm loved and held and cared for by the people in my life. Just kind of even just a sheer quantity of like people saying lovely things, like loads of different notes from different people, including my beloved Mule wrote me a very long note, actually. But Mule, what was the most base thing you did this week?
The most base thing I did this week was write Sophie a long message in a nice jar that her friends were going to give to her. Yeah, well, actually, it was a couple of weeks ago now, but I did do that. But there is another base thing that I did this week. And yeah, so essentially, after like a lot of peer pressure, and I'm choosing to call it that, rather than support and love from comrades who think that I'm good and right for the role, I've decided to run for chair of Greater Manchester Tenants Union. I'm being a little absurd here. Yeah, so it's quite odd when and this is something that's been happening for like a few months. I'd probably say since the start of the year, where we have had a big hole in the committee of GMTU for a long time. And we have had a lot of different people in different committee positions, but we have not had a chair. And the person who has been chairing meetings is our secretary, who's a long time secretary, and he's very good at what he does. But he is quite, maybe like missing some things that, could be there for chair. And I think that's probably, I think he knows that. I think he wouldn't mind me saying that. But because he didn't go for the role, he went for secretary. It's something that people have been saying for a while. They've been saying, Mule, you seem to have a really good vision of where the tenants union is going, and also you're really good with people, which is a shock to me because I thought I was really bad with people. And yeah, so good with people. And also, like, one of our staff members said to me, I had been on a day out where I had been to a sort of like a communal meeting place in Hume to meet some old friends, and I'd hung out with them for a bit of the day, and then I went to meet, tenants union people to talk about tenants union stuff and this, that, and the other. And one of our staff members who's there, a wonderful guy called Isaac Rose. He's a great comrade. He's a great author as well. You should all go read his book, The Rentier City. We might even have him on in a future show, fingers crossed, to talk about that book. But he said to me, when I told him where I'd been, he goes, "This is why you need to be chair." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "You know everyone." So apparently that's a good a good quality to have in chair, that you know everyone. And of course, like chair in GMTU, we're a radical organization. It doesn't mean I'm the boss. It doesn't mean I'm the CEO. It doesn't mean that I'm like, I guess it means that I'm in a leadership position, but most of the committee roles are leadership positions. And it's a lot more to do with kind of being there and having the committee run as smoothly as possible by making sure that they're supported. That's kind of what our chair role is about, essentially, rather than you're in charge of the union, etc., etc., etc. So I made the decision this week after consulting people like my dear friend Sophie from Mars, and also my dad, who basically I do the opposite of what he says. And as soon as I said, "Dad, I'm going to run for chair of Greater Manchester Tenants Union," he said, "Don't do that, son." So that I was like, "Thanks for the advice, Dad. I will do that." So that's the most base thing I did. I put myself in for the nomination. We started a little late, so we gotta get right into the news.
Sure
but if you have done some base things, you can message us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok. We want to know what base things you've been doing. Send us an email. You could do that too. Send us an email to based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns if you're cool with that, and we may shout it out in a later episode. But, Sophie.
Yes.
Tell us all about what Gustavo Petro is saying.
Sure. And of course, you know that Gustavo Petro is the Colombian president. And what he's been saying is that Colombia will start treating Palestinians who've been injured by Israel. As we know, Israel has destroyed most of the Palestinian, all the hospitals in Gaza now, I think. Medical treatment is near to impossible. They've been killing medics. They've been killing volunteers who are there. And so medical support is a tricky issue. This is, to be clear, this is not Colombians, like Colombian forces there doing that. It's people being transported to Colombia for treatment. There are a few countries doing this. So a Colombian military hospital, the military hospital, I may have misspoken about that. Okay, a Colombian military hospital would provide medical treatment to Palestinian children injured in the Israel-Hamas war under a plan announced Thursday by the country's foreign ministry. Colombia's Deputy Minister of Multilateral Affairs, Elizabeth Taylor Jay, told reporters the children would travel with their families to Colombia for rehabilitation. There we go. She did not provide further details, including the number of children who would receive treatment, when they would arrive in Colombia, or how long they would remain in the country. Neither the foreign ministry nor the office of President Gustavo Petro immediately responded to a request for additional information from the Associated Press. Taylor Jay made the announcement during Petro's trip to Sweden. The reason we're talking about Petro, especially in this, though, is that Petro has made a call for the UN to send in a peacekeeping force, essentially to stop Israel's genocide, to combat Israel's genocide. And Colombia recently cut diplomatic ties with Israel, as well as, I think, stopping sending them coal, which was a previous trade agreement that they had. The United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Germany have also been receiving Palestinians in need of medical treatment as a result of the ongoing siege. I'm just getting a quick note here that when I said earlier the Israel-Hamas war, I was quoting, and I wanted to clarify that, quoting from one of our sources. We at Red Planet unequivocally see this as Israeli genocide of Palestinians. But yes, critical support coming from Colombia there for Palestinians at a vital time. Yeah. Mule, do you want to tell us what's going on in France? More protests as ever?
I do want to tell you that. I want to tell everybody what's going on. France sees protests against the far right with numbers in the hundreds of thousands, which is very cool. Because as you may have heard, President Macron called parliamentary elections earlier this week after a surge of the far right. In Paris, those who feared the elections would produce France's first far right government since World War II gathered at Place de la République before marching. Crowds have been gathering daily in France ever since the anti-immigration national rally made historic gains in said European Parliament elections last Sunday. It was the European Parliament elections that they made massive gains in. But yeah, no, so those gains that the far right made in the European Parliament elections are what prompted Macron to dissolve the National Assembly. So a large crowd turned out in spite of rainy and windy weather on Saturday, holding placards reading "Liberté for all, equality for all, and fraternity with all," a reference to France's national motto, as well as "Let's break frontiers, documents for all, no to the immigration bill." And meanwhile, in the French Riviera city of Nice, demonstrators marched down Jean Médecin Avenue, the city's main shopping street, chanting against the national rally and its leader Bardea, who is 28 years old, which is bizarre to me. As I mentioned to my co-host and producer earlier before the show, I just can't. It's like, yeah, I'm all for younger politicians, but not the Nazis.
28.
Yeah, like not the Nazis though. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I'm not a Nazi, so that's I'm doing great on that front.
You are, aren't you? Actually, that is good. They were also just to clarify, that is good. They were also chanting against Emmanuel Macron, obviously, because he's a silly Billy liberal who's enabled all of this, hasn't he? That's what happens.
Yeah.
Liberals enable the far right, and they continue to enable the far right. And here is another example of that.
Yeah, there's a complex thing, and I'll try and keep it concise. I know we're running on a tight budget for news time, but there is an interesting thing with France's republic, and when protesters are quoting the liberty, equality, fraternity for all thing, there is a kind of similar culture to America in some instances, where people will evoke the ideas that, like, we were founded in this revolution that was supposed to be all about the liberty of individual citizens and all this stuff, and they're pointing out something that's real, which is that, like, where the country claims to stand for those principles, they're often bastardized and used for the persecution of people. Like, I think it was yesterday, an American ex-partner of mine was asking me about like what racism is like in France, and I was telling her about like the ways that the Republic uses like everyone's equal, so everyone must be the same, so Muslims aren't allowed to wear hijab, right? And it's like that, and she just said to me, that's not equality. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Anyway, but Macron has used the far right repeatedly to consolidate his own power as like a center right neoliberal. And so this will be an interesting one to watch, because where he may well be trying to position himself as, well, the far right are making a move, you better all get in quickly and vote for me, otherwise the far right could come in. A Parisian friend of mine told me several years ago that when Macron first came in, there was a candidate who was, in her opinion, like the French Bernie Sanders, who was completely pushed out of all debates by Macron's media buddies, so that the debate only looked like you'll either have Macron or Marine Le Pen, who is this far right lunatic. So you better vote for Macron or else. It's good to see protesters recognizing and protesting simultaneously against the far right and Macron. That was my point.
Yeah, tell us about this kind of juicy Pentagon stuff.
I sure will. So the Pentagon stands by covert vaccine disinformation campaign in Philippines. That's a headline I'm just going to read a second time. Not because I fucked it up. I just think you'll need to hear that one again. Pentagon stands by covert vaccine disinformation campaign in Philippines. A Reuters report released Friday revealed that the US intelligence apparatus ran a vaccine disinformation campaign in the Philippines, quote, to discredit China's Sinovac inoculation, payback for Beijing's efforts to blame Washington for the pandemic. Though the Philippines has been a regular ally of America, intelligence agents spread disinformation and promoted anti-vaccine sentiments using fake social media accounts. The accounts posted using a slogan which said something that translates to "China is the virus," and made a lot of claims that were completely nonsensical and untrue, including focusing on the potential presence of pork gelatin as a component in vaccines and saying that therefore it should be forbidden for Muslims to use the vaccine. The campaign started under Trump's administration, and I don't know if people remember Trump massively bigging up his friendship and support of Filipino leader Duterte. But Duterte actually made public pleas for the Philippines to be at the front lines, in his own words, at the front lines of China's rollout of this vaccine program. So that's how much their friendship mattered in real terms. Yeah, I mean, again, to just go like the ins and outs of this is like Beijing tried to blame America, tried to blame Washington for the pandemic as part of its like intelligence war, right? As part of propaganda. The Pentagon has run this disinformation campaign to try to stop China's vaccination efforts, just as revenge, right? Just harming the health of all these people, right? Like, I don't want to take any position that glibly says the Philippines are getting any kind of like negative consequence for like citing, trying to be a supporter of American imperialism or anything. Like, the people of the Philippines didn't do that. They didn't ask for that, and they've suffered the consequences, right? Less powerful countries like the Philippines have to be at the mercy of and choose between imperialist powers and larger, more powerful countries like the US and China all the time. We talked a while ago about ethnic cleansing in Armenia and like the balancing act for Armenia between the US imperialism and Russian imperialism is a classic case of this. And yeah, they're just between the devil and the deep blue sea, and it's the people who get fucked over again and again. So just like the wishing every terrible thing upon the Pentagon in Minecraft, in Roblox, but what about in IKEA, Mule?
Nice. In IKEA, bosses have realized that unions are correct, actually. In what Red Planet are calling a knockout decision from someone whose name should be Captain Obvious, IKEA bosses have realized that by increasing wages and giving workers more rights and support, that it makes them happier. In a bizarre article from Fortune, Matthew Boyle writes, according to a 2022 report by McKinsey & Co., attracting, developing and retaining frontline talent must become a top agenda item for retail CEOs, noting the challenge has only grown amid inflation and an environment where labour unions are increasingly flexing their muscles, end quote. Red Planet thinks that someone sounds scared. After years of talks between union coalitions and IKEA, the company last year agreed to let workers organise and allow store access to union representatives. Sorry, my bad. Notably, though, the parties couldn't come to terms on allowing Labour reps to enter US stores. Red Planet stands in solidarity with IKEA workers everywhere and hope that one day the union will become so strong that they'll take over the retail giant and force them to stop demolishing entire forests for mediocre furniture. I think that would be very good, wouldn't it?
I think I support that absolutely. Yeah, I think I don't know. I think IKEA, historically has been one of these employers that people have been like, oh no, they give us loads of benefits, and then like the capital does that thing where the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. Oopsie, and then there's a massive inflation, and the cost of living, is going up, and the wages are staying the same, and everyone's like, oh, those benefits weren't worth shit. But because IKEA is, I don't know. Yeah, it's a combination of lots of factors, but I think they've had an ongoing back and forth like this for years, where the bosses really want to seem progressive and like they're doing all the best things for their workers, and then their workers are like, "Yay! Oh no, it sucks again. No, it sucks again. Actually."
I've just had a note from our producer that says, "Fun fact: IKEA is hiring part-time workers to serve kids fake ice cream in Roblox."
What?
I can't confirm or deny the validity of that statement, but it's something our
That's
producer wanted us to include in the show, and so there it is.
I remember there being something really weird about the way IKEA restaurants work. Like people always talk about going there to just get the meatballs or whatever.
Right.
And I remember when you're going around the bit with the trays, like they want to present everything. It's Willy Wonka like, right? They want to hide all the labor away and make it look like a magical factory of furniture and meatballs. And
Yes.
like, and I just remember going around there one time, not for myself. I was going with someone else who was buying stuff. Uh, Former partner who's a homeowner, not me. I can't shop on IKEA. Um, and and a little sliding door opened up behind the cabinet of like desserts, and like a new tray of desserts was like ushered in by like a pair of like the staff members' hands, and you just couldn't see the worker at all, right? It was just like trying to hide the human labor aspect as much as possible, and it was just like utterly eerie. But I think there's something eerie about IKEA stores in general. Can you tell I'm padding for time? No, I'm not. I do. The thing I'm saying about the back and forth is do genuinely think that like the IKEA union could get big and powerful, and like it's a brand that people kind of have a big relationship to, and if it did that and could actually make gains in the control of the company, that would fucking whip actually.
I agree wholeheartedly. There you go. There's the news for the show.
That's it this week.
And I hope you enjoyed that. I know it's shorter than normal, but that's all you're getting. So you'll have to be happy with that.
So, on to the main segment. We've been covering the progression of Palestine resistance camps on university campuses on Red Planet the last few months, as they've been popping up first in America, first at Columbia University in New York, and then all across America, and then all over the world. The displays of solidarity from students in countries around the planet for the people of Gaza has been inspiring and heartening, as it has at the same time put pressure on their own universities and affiliated institutions to stop supporting the Israeli genocidal death machine. We are happy to be joined finally by someone from a student Palestine resistance camp to discuss their efforts and the international solidarity movement. Welcome to Molotov from the Palestine resistance camp at University of Manchester. Hey Molotov, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hiya.
How's everyone doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good. Tell us all about what has been going on. I know that's a massive question. I'm joking. I guess just introduce yourself in whatever way that you want to, in whatever way you feel comfortable with, and tell us a little bit about the camp and how it started and stuff like that. No, do you know what? Just a little bit about the camp, then we'll go into how it started. Yeah.
Yeah, so the camp started on the 1st of May out of solidarity with the American students and to escalate our protests against the university's involvement in the genocide in Gaza. It went on from about a month and a half until last Thursday, where we closed for the summer for strategic purposes. And yeah, we just continued to escalate throughout.
Fantastic. So I think, yeah, it's really, really important, I think, to stress on the importance of student activism. We've got an entire show that we're planning about student activism, but I think, in particular, in the face of the ongoing genocide in Gaza, and particularly the University of Manchester's ties to Gaza, to Israel, actually. It would be fine if they were tied to Gaza. But yeah, the University of Manchester's ties to Israel, I think it's super, super important for anyone who is, participating in the University of Manchester in whatever capacity of staff, students, to actually do a camp, basically. And that's what yous all did. So talk to us, I guess, about that. Tell us about the involvement of the University of Manchester in Israel, what its ties are to Israel, and what institutions it supports.
Yeah, so the University of Manchester is involved with the genocide in Gaza in multiple ways, mostly through its legitimization of Israel, but also through other contracts. For example, our first demand was for the university to end its £820,000 contract with BAE Systems, which obviously supplies parts to fighter jets in Israel. We also encouraged them to engage in the academic boycott of Israel through cutting ties with Tel Aviv Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and also to drop all links with the arms trade, and obviously then no disciplinary actions for students involved, just so we can continue our activism.
Great. And in terms of the encampment itself, it wasn't just an encampment. There were some escalations that also happened, because obviously that was what was called for from Palestinians in Gaza. Talk us through a little bit of that, and how the university responded to these escalations.
Yeah, so the university initially hadn't responded to any sort of like formal processes. We had a vote to divest from Israel, and they cited a charity law which prevented them doing so. They hadn't responded to a previous occupation in another building before, so we took the decision to have the encampment as a form of escalation itself. But what we really saw ended up happening was that the camp became a base for organizing once it had gotten past that initial stage in which it was a threat to the university just simply by being there. It became the base for which we organized other actions such as exam cancellations, occupations, and it got to the point where we ended up moving the camp right in front of basically Oxford Road in Manchester, where it was visible to everyone in the public. And the university refused to respond to the camp for quite a while. They still haven't, to my knowledge, even mentioned the word Palestine in their responses. And they, at one point during an escalation in which many tents were moved towards a grass where they were going to have their bicentenary events, they threatened to expel around 20 to 30 students with immediate action unless they moved. And obviously that was withdrawn at that point, because then they talked about open discussions, which weren't negotiations, but they allowed us to submit them questions, which they responded to poorly.
Right. This is just as like Zionists and their supporters always just do exhausting lies, but like this thing about the charity law, like you were asking for the university to divest like investments it had and links to like like BAE Systems or whatever. It's like what they cited as this charity law. It wasn't any kind of charitable donations, surely. Like you don't make charitable donations to BAE Systems. I don't know if you like just. I'm wondering what their kind of justification was. Not that it matters hugely.
I'm not sure what their exact justification was. To be honest, I think they used it as a loophole to be able to get out of answering the real questions that the students proposed to them.
Yeah, I think that's probably spot on. Like we know that because we also had someone on from the occupation of it was a building. I think it was maybe the Simon building or another building. It's an episode from last year. You could go and watch it, check it out, listen to it on our history sort of backlog of shows and interviews. And yeah, they're not very good actually at being transparent. So I think it stands to it makes sense like that. That's just how they operate. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about the moving of the camp. So initially the camp was in a sort of like a grassy centralized place on campus, just in the sort of like main Oxford Road campus really of University Manchester, right? And that was called Brunswick Park, which was then renamed Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh Park, right? And so that was then moved to the main road of Oxford Road, which is like the main thoroughfare. It's one of the busiest bus routes in Europe still, I think. I can't remember. I remember that used to be a big thing about 10 years ago when people would talk about Oxford Road. And so, yeah, like I guess the decision to do that was more because of visibility as well, right? Because then more people could actually see. Because every single time I went down there, like there were just these amazing banners every single time. It seemed like there was a new one put up. I imagine that was to be more visible as well, right?
Oh yeah, completely. it was surprising that before we actually did have quite a lot of public engagement, even when we were quite tucked away by the Simon building of the university. But as soon as we moved, it was we'd have cars honking all day and unfortunately all night when campers are trying to sleep. Um, and we had a lot more public engagement in terms of people just coming up to us for a chat. Obviously, on the other end of that, had to engage with more Zionists, which would come and were often aggressive. At one point, there was a punk rock concert in which some people had rock against communism tattoos, and someone got punched in the face and knocked out by one of the Nazis.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cringe, not gonna lie. Solidarity to that comrade who got knocked out. Yeah, no, I think this is the thing, right? It's that challenge in being visible and knowing actually that as soon as you're visible, you become an acceptable target. You become a focus on this aggressive, hostile attitude towards the Palestinian cause, which of course its roots are in fascism. It's simply fascism, right? So I wonder, like, if in terms of like jumping off the back of that you just said there, let's talk a bit about like the engagement that you had with the public. Obviously there was negative, obviously there was positive. What's it been like historically, like from when you started the camp, like you said, when you were tucked away, there was already this positive public engagement. Talk to us about the kinds of people who would come to show solidarity and support.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we had a real range of people, to be honest. A lot of people in the community would come, and we got a lot of surprisingly large donations from like NHS workers, for example, um, and members of the local Muslim community. We also had donations from students. I believe at one point, a student came up to me when I was at the welcome desk, and he just won £100 Amazon voucher as part of like this competition, I believe, in the university, and he'd just been reading about it, like what the genocide in Gaza going on, and he donated all of that. And yeah, just lots of things like that, really positive. A lot of local Palestinians would obviously come to the camp and express like their thanks for what everyone was doing. Um, and yeah, obviously students would engage heavily. They'd always come just ask us to explain the demands. We'd talk them through them. We'd give people tours of the camp. Likewise with staff. I think again when once it was moved to Oxford Road, we saw that people every single bus that would go past, everyone would look. You'd sometimes hear a cheer or two, but of course on the other end of that, that we had some negative engagement. That being said, it was incomparable to what you'd seen at other encampments, which had been attacked by Zionists, etc. We didn't really have much of that, but I put that really down to the camp's organization. We had people watching the camp 24/7, at least 4 or 5 people at all times, who would just chat to people, usually just have a friendly conversation, and it might like quell them. But otherwise, just obviously policy of no talking if they're engaging in bad faith would usually work. For example, when Charlie Veach came to the camp on multiple occasions, everyone would just ignore him and he fucked off, which was great.
Yeah, top. He's a bit of a cunt, isn't he, that guy? So, I think one of the things that I think people are probably wondering when they watch this show, when they listen to this show, is that this seems like a huge undertaking, creating an encampment at a university, and I wonder if you could say to those people, or at least explain in as much detail as you can, just kind of what goes into the organizing of it, because I think that as soon as people actually understand like how it's possible, then it's something that can be possibly replicated if people wanted to do that themselves in the coming semester.
Yeah, so I think I can't speak for the encampments in general, but what I think the Manchester Camp of Resistance did excellently was organizing in a very decentralized manner. Effectively, we had multiple working groups. People would join these working groups effectively based on what skills they felt that they could contribute the best. Obviously, like it would include anyone. And I think it led people first of all to play to their best aspects, but also not having a hierarchical structure. really allowed anyone to be able to get involved to any capacity that they could. It also has made it impossible for the university to be able to find any sort of like specific leaders and target them. And I think we're also quite lucky with the donations we had from the public. And we were one of the more well-off camps by the end, which a lot of that money actually went towards supporting other encampments. But yeah, I'd say just the organisation of the camp went really well. Every working group had a good purpose and was able to organise effectively.
Brilliant. And in terms of how easy it is to get involved, like you say, people would just be able to come up to the welcome tent and be like, "Yo, how can I help? Like, what do you need?" And there was always something to do, right? Like, that's as easy as it is to get involved.
Yeah, completely. I mean, a lot of people would come and just ask, what supplies would you need? It'd usually be food or tents, etc. But most people were just wondering how they could donate their time. And usually what they would do is sign up to a camp watch shift, um, which that's effectively de-escalation and just keeping care of the camp. But that kind of allows people to get to grips with the area, meet the people, and then usually people would then go on to join other working groups, such as the strategy group, which a lot of the planning would occur in, for example, or the outreach, which is press and social media. And yeah, but I mean, you'd see people who come to the camp and they they only planned on coming for a few hours to help out, but then you really see them getting sucked into the process, and they I mean, I can speak for myself personally in this case. I didn't think I would spend nearly the amount of time at the camp that I did, but I found it impossible to leave just because, not only because of the cause, but also just the sense of community that really built up.
Yeah, I think that that is a massive thing when it comes to organizing in general, not just an encampment, but I think in every single structured organization, community is so key. If you can't feel like your comrades are your friends, then I think you're going to really struggle to have that sort of cohesive movement, that cohesive way of doing actions. So, yeah, I mean, we've spoken a little bit about the university's unwillingness to engage. But what was I guess, like the initial response? Like, you know, forgive me if you've touched on this already, but I really want to just sort of like drive home, you know, they wanted to like expel some people. Like, can you talk about that a bit more? Like, what
Yeah,
sort
of
of
course.
led to that? Yeah.
Yeah, so initially the university seemed to have a policy of just no contact at all, just ignore it. They published something, I believe, saying that students have the right to protest, but this protest must not be disruptive. Um, and they said about Jewish students feeling unsafe on campus, which didn't really feel right because we had a lot of Jewish students at the encampment that were very active, and the camp was like quite like it was inclusive towards everyone, to be honest. So the university continued with this line for a while until it was their bicentenary 200th anniversary event, in which we had massive escalations planned. And as soon as these tents, as I said earlier, were moved over to the green next to the student union, the university panicked and they threatened to expel these students with immediate effect and to cancel their bicentenary, or they presented the option that we could go into open talks, not negotiations, because University of Manchester don't like using the word negotiations, but indirectly through the student union.
Right, so they didn't even they didn't even sit down with actual representatives from the camp. But yeah, I wonder, okay, that's interesting, yeah, because yeah, they're like, oh no, you have to do it through the proper official channels. Yeah, very interesting. Okay. And there have been like a couple of things as well that have happened in the universities. Well, not in the university, sorry, but like with the camp. For example, after the emergency march for Rafah, which was, I think, 17th of May. I might be wrong. It might have been the 26th. I can't remember. It was a Monday anyway. I remember that much.
Yeah, it was a Monday.
And
Yeah.
yeah, the police decided to do a thing, didn't they? Do you want to talk us through what happened that day?
Yeah, so there was a peaceful march going down Oxford Road that ended at the camp, and the police, we saw them trying to go towards the doors because people were standing there. For people who don't know, we renamed one of the university's main buildings, Whitworth Hall. It was renamed to Walid Dakar Hall, and we had at that time occupied this hall. And what we saw was just a completely like unprecedented police response. I had a comrade of mine punched in the face that day. I think multiple even. Someone I know dislocated their arm. I mean, there are videos out online if you go on Manchester Leftist Action or the Youth Front for Palestine's Instagrams. And what happened was the police tried to get in the building. They will deny it, but comrades were on every single exit and entrance of the building, which is quite a lot because it's a huge fucking building. And we saw police in every single part of it, and they were trying to force their way in, although they would deny this obviously. But the building was very well defended. And yeah, and what ended up happening, sorry, was just because of the amount of people we had who were able to protect the camp just by like standing outside chanting at the police effectively fucked off and they left. And since then we had them patrol. They came to the camp every day for safety checks, etc., quote unquote safety, and to make people feel safe, which felt quite ironic because it definitely made everyone very uncomfortable. And yeah, it was really just them using the demonstration as an opportunity for them to escalate. And if you've seen the scenes from the protest from yesterday, you can see how violent the Greater Manchester Police really are.
Yeah, I do think that that's something worth talking about. We had a bit of a rushed news segment today, sorry, and I think it is worth just touching on that a bit. So, for those of the audience that are unaware, obviously, pro-Palestinian protests have been happening in Manchester as they have in pretty much every major city all over the world, weekly since the genocide in Gaza began. And this week, particularly in Manchester, for some reason, I don't know what it is. I don't know whether the cops just decided that this was the week they were going to go sicko mode, or that they had the backing of a bunch of fascists that I know were there as well. Yeah, they decided to really just beat the shit out of a bunch of people, including, an older person with a cane, young women. This is all like not anything surprising to anyone who knows the way in which the police operate. Just particularly Greater Manchester Police, Metropolitan Police, in general. And it was absolutely just fucking disgusting and vile. And yeah, so this is something that I imagine a lot of students in the encampment already knew, just generally, just about like. Well, we know that the cops don't keep us safe and stuff like that. They also stole something. They stole one thing at least. I know they did, but were they like making a habit of like just nicking stuff and saying like this is bad, you can't have it? Like,
yeah. So Comrade had a starry plough flag, which is obviously a symbol of Irish resistance. It's not a prescribed flag, and the GMP just stole it, and they've refused to return it since, I believe. But yeah, speaking on yesterday, the police were completely brutal. I wasn't there personally, but I had a comrade of mine that was shoved in front of a moving tram whilst there were children screaming behind her. And there was another arrested. But it really seemed to start mostly out of the police protecting like the fascist scum that were there. Obviously, Veach was there as he usually is. And it was, I almost would say it's surprising because of the um, it seemed unprecedented compared to even normal protests in terms of previous police responses. But and there's videos online of a female police officer hitting someone who's just filming across the road, completely unprovoked, and it's all documented. We had a policy at camp of making sure every single badge number was taken and the police were followed at all times. So we tried to ensure that at camp, the police would be held accountable for everything they did, and we definitely wouldn't let anything they did, for example, this theft of the Starry Plough flag, as we wouldn't accept that at all.
Yeah, it's quite surprising, really, isn't it? I'm being sarcastic when I say that. That they were so concerned about safety at the camp, but it seems like the place that was the most unsafe was the place where they just started hitting people, for no reason, which was nowhere near the camp. Well,
Yeah.
they did come to the camp actually and do a bit of that, and
So
then
I'm aware I'm talking, like Mule, you've been down at the camp a bit, like you've been a bit involved with the community. Like I'm kind of the outsider in this conversation. So I'm kind of curious, like police have a couple of tactics when it comes to like how integrated they treat the population, right? Like the Peel's, like Robert Peel's principles of policing, like one of them relies heavily, and we talked about this when I was talking about Abolition Revolution by Shanice McBean and Avi Ade, on the idea that the police are part of the population and are one and the same thing. And so like this, like the kind of policing tends to be rarer and tends to be more of a last resort to just like be in basically open warfare with the population, because it shows everyone that the police are not us, that they come from outside our community, that they're all fucking bastards, and that they take a choice to no longer be us and be people when they put on that fucking uniform. Um, but so it's rarer for them to do that, but you're describing a lot of those kinds of actions just so openly hostile. And I'm kind of curious because they seek to section off part of the population as criminals, the bad ones, right? This is the basic fundamentals of carceralism is some kinds of people are different and bad and will never change and are evil, right? And that's the basics of cop brain, right? But and so either I'm finally getting to my point here. Sorry, this has been rambly, but so either right, the whole camp can be bad and wrong and criminal, and the police can be at war with it, or the police could try to pretend they're like trying to find anyone who's bad in the camp and get rid of them for the safety of the good people who are just protesting. And I'm curious what kind of mixture you've seen of those two strategies, because as I understand it, those have been the two strategies that police have used across the Imperial Corps for all sorts of student camps. The two strategies, again, just to sum up, being like either the whole camp is criminal or they want to work with the people who are protesting, the good people, but try to get the bad people out. How much of those two do you think you've seen?
Looking in specific instances, I can't think of times the police decided to group people per se, but I would say we did have definitely very varied police responses, but it was mostly due to the number of police there. If there was one or two, they would usually walk around, and in a couple of cases, there was a drunk Zionist who started like walking around the camp threatening people, and I believe his friend phoned the police, but then the police just ended up talking to him and being like, "Oh, you can't force them to talk to you because we disengaged from him," and he was obviously quite upset about that. But on the other end, you just had open violence. The university, on the other hand, really tried to set a divide between students and non-students who would come to the camp for meals, for example, and also help out. And the university would consider these non-students as not legitimately part of the camp or listening to their concerns at all. As we see with the precedent of the Nottingham case, in which I believe the court ruled that non-students weren't permitted to be there. But I think, I've been thinking about this, that you don't have to be a banker to protest Barclays. You don't have to be a student to protest the University of Manchester. This is a common struggle for the Palestinian people, and the police and the universities can't divide people in this way.
Yeah, so they quite clearly were, doing the cop's job for them basically by doing that. Yeah, trying to be like, oh, okay, no, these are the legitimate protesters. Here are the bad ones, and we need to get rid of the bad ones. So that's really interesting. Yeah, like the cops actually didn't try and do that too much.
Yeah, I mean, what? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, what I would say is that the other level to this, other than just university management and the police, is the university security, which are kind of like act somewhere in between. But they really, well, on the whole, bad. They were pretty mixed. Most of the time, they would just stand and watch. But we saw them working with the police, and they, there were instances of them being Islamophobic to Muslims who were praying. And even in the last week of the camp, a member of the security team sexually assaulted a member of the camp, as it's been posted about. But really a disgusting response from security. And they obviously aren't legally allowed to lay hands upon anyone, but you can see video footage of them doing it. And I believe they picked up people and moved them away. And in an action, I believe that a student was hit just by a member of staff at the university, and security effectively protected this person, took them away. But we saw security also like helping the police try and get into Waladaka Hall. But when there was a threat of violence against us, they would stand and do nothing. We had a couple of incidents with drunk members of the public trying to walk through. And as a last resort, as the people were starting to get violent, they would, it was voted to our security to potentially remove the person. They said, oh, we can't do anything if they're not student or staff. And yeah, they were really fucking useless with that, to be honest. But when it was supporting the Zionists or supporting the university or supporting the police, security wouldn't really adhere to their official protocols as tightly.
And I know that it's complete bollocks that they say that they can't do anything if someone isn't staff or a student, because I have hung around with vagabonds and ragamuffins in Manchester my entire life, and we've fucked around on university campuses and been chased by fucking security, so I know that that's bollocks. What a load of shit. So that's my statement on that. Anyway, yeah, so okay, so that was kind of like the strategy to how the university, because obviously, like, the security are acting in this way. They're going to have taken their orders from the university, like, of course they are. So that's clearly like the strategy that the university was moving, like, right, people that they want to speak to, the people who are making decisions and stuff like that, we're not going to speak to them, but you security just see what happens. If they get beaten up by people, just don't do anything. You know what I mean? It just kind of feels like that. Like, whatever you could do to like get them to fuck off, just do that. Okay, yeah, interesting. So yeah, we've spoke a bit about like tactics on how people have tried to like get you out, and we've spoken about like some really effective stuff that you've done at the camp. Let's talk a bit about sort of like in terms of progress and like where you feel. I guess you could say personally, but if you have like a sort of a collective answer for this of how that people are feeling about it, like how is everybody feeling about the response of the university to like want to actually like they want to do this like open discussion kind of thing, however fucking stupid it is. How do you feel about that as kind of like the result that you're at the moment?
I wouldn't say there is a single member of the camp that is happy with this university's response. The reason we've chosen to follow this rather than continue outright disruption for the time being is the fact that this is the university's first response to the pro-Palestinian movement explicitly since 2015, I believe. It doesn't feel like it, but in a sense, it is a stepping stone. And on a tactical level, there is a new vice chancellor who isn't as cartoonishly bad starting next year. And we'd like to potentially set good precedent with them there. But every single member of the camp is fully ready to continue escalations when we need to. The camp will come back next year. And I think it was quite a bittersweet end to the camp. We knew what we'd achieved in terms of this mass mobilization and forcing the university's hand, because it doesn't sound like much, and it isn't much, but the University of Manchester are extremely stubborn. So we had to take what we get in terms of that a bit. And the university know that if we wanted to, we could have cancelled their bicentenary, we could have cancelled graduation, and we could have cost them millions of pounds just by being there. So we're not hopeful about these open talks, but we're hopeful with what they could lead to with sufficient pressure.
Well, that's what it is, right? Because it's like, in terms of activism as a whole, you know, if we think about the sort of broader struggle of marginalized people everywhere, working class people, it's a class war, right? There are people in social class identifications and working class identifications that are, you know, oppressed all over the world. And so what we're doing is we're engaging in class war, and it is a war. And, you know, you have that kind of victory where it may feel like, geez, we fought really, really hard and this is all we got. Well, actually, the fight isn't over, right? That's not what it is. Like, yeah, it's not a game of football, right? It's not, you know, you're not playing cricket with the university and it's like, oh, you know, we got to wait till the next tournament. It's like, no, the fight carries on. So I think that is, yeah, definitely like a really good way to look at it. And yeah, like I know from experience, like doing stuff with GMTU, like yeah, you really do have to take every single little victory that you can, even if you feel like you've like rattled a landlord or you've like, you know, scared someone's social housing provider into like, you know, at least responding to a demands letter. Like that is a victory and it's something to be celebrated because you know, it's a demonstration of power. And I think that demonstration of power and solidarity that you've had, where now they're actually like, you know, like you say, you know, they've like historically really just not responded to like pro-Palestinian, you know, groups at all for such a long time. And now it's like, you've gotten this. It's like, okay, yeah, no, for real. I think that's absolutely a victory. And it's really, really good. It goes to show that
this is protracted against the university for strategic reasons. It didn't make sense to carry on the camp in the form we had. There's not much to protest. No students and no staff at the university in the summer. There are plans to come back. Things will be consolidated and organization is continuing, and we expect to be bigger next year. And we don't expect much from these talks at all. But we have socialists on next year's student union, who the talks are indirectly through, and we expect to become more militant next year, even more so than we have been.
Great, that sounds absolutely awesome. I think, yeah, in terms of you know, engaging in the talks and stuff like that. It's kind of one of those where it's like, all right, well, if they go to a very milquetoast place where nothing actually gets done and there are no decisions made, then, you know, what can the university reasonably expect? Like that nothing is going to happen now. Like they've seen like the actual power that the organizing has led to, where it's like, yeah, the camp has been there for a month and a half, and it's a long time in the grand scheme of things. And as well, like, you know, it's done so many wonderful things. Like I remember being there, like I think on the first day of the camp or maybe the second night or something, and the vibe was just like phenomenal, like absolutely like immaculate vibes. It was wonderful. Like everyone was getting fed, people were playing a bit of football, you know, people were having discussions, like incredibly like good progressive political discussions, and you could just tell that everybody was there for like the right reason, and it was just wonderful. It was beautiful. It was everything that I like kind of imagine you know, revolutionary activity to contain, actually. And so it's like, you know, do they think that, you know, something that powerful is just gonna go away? You know, because they obviously know how powerful it is, because, you know, that's why they've actually rescinded and gone, all right, yeah, well, we'll have a discussion, you know, just to kind of like, you know, they're desperately trying to make you shut up, right? It's funny because I remember, I think, like hearing that the university have said that they didn't, like this was something that Manchester Leftist Action posted about, like the university said, oh, we didn't tell the cops to, you know, attack Wally Daka Hall. Right. And it's like, no, you've tried, like like they've tried to do this stuff, they've tried to get the cops to do stuff, they've tried to get the security to do stuff, and now they're at this kind of like final bit where they're like, maybe if we just say we'll do something, then maybe they'll piss off. But you know, they're wrong if they think that you're going to be satisfied with you know, milk toast responses, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, this fight will continue. It started long before anyone at the university started their career here, and it will continue long past. Me personally, I only joined university this year, and I have a lot more time to be able to dedicate towards the movement. A lot of people who really have been active, some of them are graduating, but since the camp started, there have been tons of people in their first year of university who have now, in the space of 9 months, have witnessed police brutality directed to protect the university. They've seen a lack of response, and they've seen a growth of left-wing and pro-Palestinian movement. So the struggle will continue until our demands are met. There's absolutely no doubt of that at all.
Dope. Yeah, I think like it's important to remind our audience quite fervently, actually, that, you know, in terms of organizing, I think, because our function as a show, I don't know if we really explained this to you, if I explained this to you when I met you, but you know, we're trying to get basically theory nerds on the internet who love to talk a big game about politics to actually go outside and organize and you know, make some kind of a revolution happen, basically. And I think like the thing to remind people who watch or listen to our show is that, you know, this, like you've just said, this is a bunch of people who were in their first year of university, and they were like, yeah, we need to do something actually about this. And we've seen other people doing it who are literally in the same boat as us, and we're just going to emulate that. And, you know, I think to a lot of people, organizing sounds scary. I was talking about this with a comrade from the union yesterday. I was talking about the nebulous term organizing, like it hangs over people's heads, right? Like some kind of terrifying, scary thing. And you think like, well, what does that actually consist of? But when you realize that, like, well, what it consists of is just building a structure, right? And then all of a sudden, the word structure becomes the big, scary, nebulous word. Well, what is a structure? Well, a structure is a collection of people who make an organization work. Then it starts to take shape. And you're like, oh, okay, so we need people to do stuff. So we need someone to run social media. We need someone to run money. We need someone to run solidarity actions. We need someone to organize protests. So it starts to take shape in your head as soon as you start to think about, like, okay, well, what needs to be done? And again, like, you know, it should be incredibly inspirational to everybody watching or listening to our show, that something so incredibly, like, just awesome. I can't stress to anyone enough, and I'm sure you can agree with me, Molotov, that like the vibes at this camp were amazing. And that's probably why you stayed for so long. Like, you didn't think you would be staying as much as you did, but it's like, no, it's actually awesome, right?
Yeah, on a personal level, I had effectively just been someone who read theory, and identified with the views I have now still. Obviously, they've been melded more by circumstances I've witnessed, and through organization. But I would say to people who, you know, would identify with the revolutionary left, get offline, get organized. It's really like you'll get sucked into the process, and you'll meet great people, and you'll really feel like what you believe in is being put forward to the world in a way that can be really, really effective if you do it correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so easy for people to feel like posts are everything and are their whole world. And for some people, like, they are, right? Like, some people spend altogether just way too much fucking time online. But on this organizing kind of run of questions that we're on, I have someone who I have sort of a contact of a contact. We'll see if we can get them on the show at some point, who's involved in a group of like union work, like trade union organizers who are from Palestine, whose perspective is very, very like staunchly that like only socialist organizing can liberate Palestine, and only like worker solidarity can lead to the end of what Israel is doing and the dismantling of the systems that are doing it. And I was just wondering, I guess, if you reflect that opinion, if you think the camp reflects that opinion. Like, I know you were just talking about socialists being on the student organizing body for next year and that being a positive, and I think I see why that is, but I just wondered if you, like, I guess, share in that belief that like only socialist organizing will actually achieve this, and also if like I don't know if you have opinions on how, if the camp kind of has thoughts on this kind of like structural building towards something that can actually stop the genocide.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone on the camp has been socialist. There are points of unity, for example, supporting of a one-state solution. And we have seen a shift of some people who consider themselves sort of single issue on Palestine, especially from the local community. But I think what's been great is the political education that's come through the camp, which there was a working group dedicated towards. And like, I think when people start to connect what's happening in Palestine to the wider anti-imperial and then subsequently the anti-capitalist struggle, then people will do whatever they can to act against this system. So obviously people are acting in different ways. There are some people on the left who have been involved in their trade unions or trying to get involved in the students' union, and there are others who will just do what they can to organize their workplace, and some who will just provoke the university at any cost. And yeah.
So in terms of, because I wanted to talk quite a lot about the daily camp meals that happen, because that was like a massive thing. Like every single day you could go to the University of Manchester Palestinian Solidarity Camp and get a scran, right? And that was top, because I remember even one day I was just out for a run, and I thought, oh, sack it. Well, I'll halfway through the run, I'll stop by the camp because I know that I can get like a tangerine and a glass of water, right? Talk to us a bit about that, and like kind of like the people who contributed to that, what kind of different, I guess, like meals were prepared, like what different types of food support that was given to the camp.
Yes, so I think, to be honest, I think the food was probably the most successful point of the camp in terms of community organizing, because it brought people to the camp who wouldn't normally have been there. There was quite a large unhoused community that came to the camp and then became involved in its organization as well, who previously, a lot of them had been apolitical, and now some of them are joining groups like Palestine Action, for example. I think we had such a variety of food. There were vegan, halal, and meat options every day. It would change up all the time, and it was a lot of dishes with rice, salad, sometimes chicken, beef. There were times there were pizzas, falafel, etc. And really, it was just such overwhelming support from the community in bringing the food. But I think what was good about it was people would sit down and eat, and then they would talk about politics. They would talk about the revolutionary left. People would talk about what was going on in Palestine. They would discuss plans for the camp just by socializing over some food. And there are even like kids there that would come and they just come and take a few snacks from the food tent. And yeah, just people really got involved somehow. I think food kind of brought everyone together.
Yeah, it's something that we've spoken about on the show many, many times, and it's something that we try and make sure it's a thing with Greater Manchester Tenants Union for sure. I think that there is a lot to be said for people coming together and sharing a meal. It's something we've said on the show before, but I'm just going to reiterate it for people who may not have heard it before. But when you eat food that someone else has given to you, you're engaging in an act of trust. You're trusting that this person is not poisoning you. You're trusting that this person is basically like giving you food that is good for you, it's healthy, etc. And it's also just like one of the very basic human survival needs, really, right? It's just one level above water and air, really. And, you know, if that is something that you can sit there with other people and partake in, and they're also, you know, they're consuming the same food, or at least food from the same place that the food you're eating has come from, then it builds this massive solidarity. It's huge. It's a very primal thing as well, you know, like you're engaging in this like ancient tradition of humans coming together, communally supporting each other. And yeah, I think another like solid thing that I remember seeing at the camp was there seemed to be something happening at least every day. So there was a variety of workshops and I guess just like classes that were going on. So speak to us a bit about like you know, what kind of events would take place on a daily basis.
Yeah, so of course there were the demos outside Welly Dapper Hall. There was the marches that would come through every Saturday. But yeah, other than the meals, there were just workshops all the time. They ranged from anti-fascist action and history of the anti-fascism in the United Kingdom and the current day threat and what we can do to resist. There were workshops from Jewish action for Palestine. And there were other ones that were just like genuinely just like life skills, like first aid training occurred. And of course there were like too many talks to name, to be honest. There were 2 or 3 a day, pretty much for the entirety of the camp. And I think yeah, the camp was just such an excellent third space for people outside of home or the workplace. And to be honest, even outside of these specifically targeted workshops, I probably had some of the most interesting political conversations of my life just sitting around at 2 a.m. watching the camp with a few of my comrades.
Yeah, I think that that is like a massive thing to focus on, the fact that it became a third space. And this was also massive for me. It was certainly a third space for me. Um, like there's definitely like a hole in my life now that it's not there anymore, because it's like I literally walked past where it was, you know, the Wally Ducker Hall in Adnan Albersh Park yesterday, and I just kind of looked and I was like, oh yeah, it's not there anymore. You know, it's something that I would have just like stopped by. I literally took a date there. Like that's how much of like a third space it became for me. Like I met someone and we were talking about politics, and they were like, yeah, I'd actually really like to learn more about the camp. And I was like, would you like to go? And they were like, yes, that sounds really nice. And we did. So, you know, it's fulfilled all these like very important needs. I think that like, you know, people who are pro-Palestinian, want to support the Palestinian struggle, you know, just really needed in their life, you know, and it all centered around like the education of what is happening, the genocide of Palestinians and settler colonialism at large. Yeah, so I think like that function, like it actually becoming that a third space, was so powerful.
Yeah, I definitely met people at the camp who I will continue organizing in the future. But to be honest, like since the camp started, I've even gone out with a few of them. We've gone to like raves and stuff. And it's like it's nice to meet people who you can organize with, but you can also just you know, just they can be there for you. And likewise. And I feel like there is a bit of a void in my life since the camp ended. I mean, I left university the other day, and it's definitely just a massive shift leaving the camp. I can't imagine going back to university without it being there, to be honest, which is another reason I'm quite glad it's coming back. But to be honest, it will keep growing. It never really stopped growing until we announced its ending. Um, and even meeting a few people after the camp ended, everyone just wants it to come back as soon as possible. So I think on day one next, when it starts again, there will just be this atmosphere of determination again. But actions aren't stopping. People are continuing to target the university. They're continuing to target other businesses with Zionist links in Manchester, and of course the marches like the one where we saw violence yesterday by the police. They're happening every Saturday. And they're not going to stop happening because people are this determined about what's happening in Gaza.
I just think like it's something that needs to be continued and replicated everywhere, and I think in fact like there should be some inspiration that other organizations get from the university encampments because of those extremely positive benefits that we spoke about, just a few minutes ago, like the thing about it being a third space, the thing about like meeting people there, forming lasting bonds and friendships, comradeships, like that is so important to any kind of leftist organizing. Like it's so key. There's something that you realize when, like me, you used to be like a big fuckhead when here's me doing this old thing. Like when I was your age, I used to be a big fuckhead basically. And what you realize is that a lot of the mates that you have when you're going out and getting fucked, they're not actually your mates. They just want you to get fucked so that they feel better about the fact that they love to get fucked. And then you're all doing this sort of violent cycle of abuse where you're basically enabling everyone who's got a problem. But when you go out and get fucked up, not necessarily super fucked, when you go out and get fucked up a bit with people who are actually like solid comrades, that becomes like a whole new thing, like a whole different thing, and it becomes a very, very special kind of joy that I would recommend everyone attempt to participate in. And it doesn't even have to be.
This is the most mule motivational speech ever. We should put this over some break beats. I'm gonna get we should drop this on the YouTube shorts of the Red Planet channel.
What I found was that a lot of nights where usually I would have been going for a pint with my mates, I just didn't really feel like it. I was invited out a few times and I just declined because I was just sitting around camp having a chat with people. To be honest, it felt just as fulfilling. That being said, I think it was important for people to take a few days off from the camp or even a week if they needed to, because that intensity of organization can be very draining. And there are people who did have to take time off and come back. So I think like the balance is good, but I think also that being able to organize some people and just go out with them is great. Obviously, because there's a large Muslim presence at camp, a lot of people were non-drinkers, but that definitely inspired like other forms of activity, just like to be able to socialize. And yeah, it was great.
Yeah, that's another huge point. Another huge point. And I want everyone who is listening who is doing any kind of organizing, if in your org, right, you have identified that there is a Muslim population, a Muslim demographic, then you need to be really desperately organizing non-drinking based events, because I have found that there are certainly people who want to just organize in pubs, and that can be really fucking exclusionary to one of the most marginalized communities that exists, particularly in the UK. It's absolutely the case that we have a large Muslim population, and they are extremely marginalized, and I think that they're excluded from leftist organizing spaces quite a lot.
I also feel like a lot of these drinking events can inadvertently be exclusive towards women as well. A lot of women don't feel, especially having spoken to them at camp, didn't feel like a lot of these political groups that would do drinking events, they didn't necessarily feel comfortable being around a lot of drunk men in a pub every time they wanted to talk politics or organize. So I think with that added level as well, it's important. Like it's okay to have drinking socials; they can be really fun, but it is important that everyone should be like included, regardless of background. And that was why I think it was great. The camp had a zero alcohol policy. People would obviously go to the pub after sometimes, but whilst they were on camp, which is usually where they would be, no drinking at all.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. That was actually the exact thing one of the two things I was gonna say. I haven't drunk in 2 years. Like I'm happy to go to pubs with friends now. But like I wasn't to begin with. It did make me feel uncomfortable. And yeah, also for women, like it can be an exclusionary thing to organize in places where there are a bunch of drunk men. And yeah, I think that there are, when we're talking about organizing for Palestine solidarity, considering that Muslims don't drink is a huge one, but it just like is actually just a huge thing for all kinds of groups of people in society, like who don't usually get considered when you're like, this is a strong community space. And the pub can be a strong community space, but it can also be like super exclusionary for a lot of people.
Yeah, like, I used to be a fuckhead, but I'm not anymore, and I don't like to get fucked up anymore. And I find it a lot harder to resist getting fucked up when people around me are getting fucked up. So yeah, I think that is, there's multiple different types of people who can benefit from that kind of thing. I think also like parents, because when you have responsibilities, obviously you're not gonna be like, yeah, I'm gonna get super drunk, I'm gonna drink loads of beer and look after my child. Like, it's not how it works. So I think that too is like super important. Yeah, really important things to consider. So okay, yeah, we've spoken a bit about the importance of that inclusiveness. We've spoken a bit about the food at the camp, the workshops. Yeah, and then I don't know. Do you want to talk a bit about the experience of like actually camping, like actually like just sleeping outside in in a tent at the university? Like what was it like?
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I didn't camp. I was usually do night shifts very late until about sometimes till 8 or 10 a.m. You can't sleep there during the day. It's too loud. So there was definitely a divide on camp because people who would do camp watch would do it all night. You can't sleep there during the day. So I camped a few times. It's obviously freezing. I just had a short, small blanket and a pillow. Um, but I would say the actual camping itself wasn't necessarily integral to the camp, just because there were people who would be there 24/7. Sometimes I'd go home for 6 hours and come back. Um, and there was definitely like a shifting sense in time that didn't feel like a month and a half. That felt like a year. But it would be nice if you just wake up, or you'd watch or even from my perspective, just watch the sunrise at 4 or 6 in the morning, whether it is at the moment. And you just see people getting out their tent, starting their day, and you'd be able to talk to them immediately. It was great.
Yeah, I definitely felt like the camp had been there for a year, and I wasn't even camping. I wasn't even there that often, really. Yeah, it was bizarre. I remember being there on the night when I think it was like the 33rd day or something, and like I saw on the board like they were keeping a tally of it, and it said this camp has been here for 33 days, and I was like, that's wild. No way. Like, it feels like 4 months, 6 months. It's just
Yeah,
like we just
I'm
because
pretty sure we ended up giving up counting. We just in all the later speeches you hear everyone say, "Oh, 40 days," and we kind of just stopped counting then because it felt very liminal. It was just there. It didn't really feel like it had a time. It's kind of hard to explain. Um, Even though it was weird because every day just felt completely different there as well. It never felt monotone in any way.
I do want to bring this up, even though this is something that I've spoken to Sophie and Conrad and Tim a little bit outside of the episode last week, and then I've spoken to Sophie about it, about her time on the ZAD. Time seems to be a bit of a theme when it comes to doing revolutionary stuff. Like, we spoke to some workers in Florence in Italy last week who had taken over their factory, and one of the things that one of the people who'd been there said was that time felt very strange there. Also, when Sophie was on the ZAD, you said yourself, time is different there.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was something that I couldn't quite place for a really long time. Really long time. But like when we arrived there was something I was like, it's not. It's some kind of aura the space has almost. Like, I don't know. It's something spiritual. It's really hard to describe what it is, but something is really really different. And I mean, being with a host there who has like worse ADHD than Mule was like fun. Like, it was funny noticing that like we've got these appointments to like go and interview these people at 1 p.m. the next day, and then it's 4 p.m. the next day, and we're swinging by, and they're like, nah, that's fine. Like, we just, because people are in charge of their own time, like people can choose to fill their hours how they want, and they're not answering to some boss. Their day isn't structured by someone else's demands of productivity or of their labor or whatever. And if people are coming together for a big event, then they do that. But like if you when that was a running thing, like we were really late for when we said we were going to interview people, either like the interview spilling over or we just show up late, we woke up late, whatever happens. And or Jay being a femme like me, like just take 3 hours to get ready in the morning, and then we get there and we're late for the whole day. And it's just like it never mattered. It just never mattered because they're A, in community, and B, in charge of their own time. And so it just has this different relationship to time. And that's what I couldn't quite get until being back in the capitalist world and out of that example that we were in of like real communism existing in the world. That hopefully, we're gonna do some more filming on later in the year and then get that documentary made. But like there is something, I think Mule's gonna see it when we go over there sometime this year, of like time being completely different. It's even something that, and I think it comes to, it's in revolutionary organizing, like you said, Mule. China Mieville talks about it when he wrote October, his sort of dramatized history of the Russian Revolution, where like there's just this like shortening and lengthening of time by people's subjectivities, like rather than everything being segmented by the capitalist work hour, right? Just like homogenizes time and makes it into this like it's a unit that can be done in sums to do economics with and measure our productivity and so on. But that's not very human, right? And like when people are seizing control for real by organizing these structures, by organizing their communities and so on, there comes to be this like at first this pressing feeling of time and this urgency and these ebbs and flows, right? And there's the famous quote from Lenin about like there are decades where nothing happens and then weeks where decades happen. And it's like, yeah, that's a feeling in revolutionary activity. And then when something is, not that the revolution's ever done, right? But like when something is achieved and a space is held and there's something, the factory from the people you interviewed last time, this camp, the ZAD, the fucking, the Russian Revolution, like once people achieve something and they hold something and they know it's theirs, it's this like relaxing into this freedom from the capitalist like unit of time. Those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, to be honest. You said the thing from Lenin I was literally planning to say, to be honest. That is exactly how I feel. I mean, as someone with ADHD as well, there was always something for me to do, which was great, but also gave me time to relax. But I think talking to Fraser, who was involved in the rent strike, who I think you've had on before as a comrade of mine, he described how he felt this like weird sense of time as well. When you spend like weeks and weeks in this one very small place, but all these like really weird and wacky things happen over that time period, you kind of grow like a sense of attachment to that place in particular. So it was quite a trippy experience. I was just walking down Oxford Road the day after camp ended, listening to some music, and I just saw like where the tents were, and I just thought, fuck, like so much of my life happened there. Like that was definitely one of those like months where decades happened.
Yeah, absolutely. A question I wanted to ask was, in talking about the community and talking about what everyone was able to find in the camp and in the community around the camp, I there's a concern that someone might listen to this and they might be like, oh, well, these are just like the classic like reactionary nonsense you hear about, like, oh, privileged university kids who blah 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 whatever. And I wanted to kind of put it to you like about a hypothetical, I guess, tension between everything positive that you're finding in the camp and staying attuned to the purpose of the camp, which is ultimately about the genocide going on in Palestine right now. And like, do you feel that there was a tension? Do you feel like you overcame that tension? Do you feel like that's inaccurate to even describe in the first place? About like just like a balance between what you are finding and staying attuned to the suffering and the misery and the genocide.
Yeah, so I would say that on your first point, potentially initially there felt like there was probably just a very small, I would say, divide between the students and members of the community. but I'm going to be honest that those really faded over time, especially as more people joined. I mean, most of the overarching decisions were made at general meetings, which were free to attend by anyone. Obviously, there were issues, in fact, that they tended to be more student dominated at times. Usually, that's why we tried to make sure they would always happen in the evening when people had finished work, for example. Usually, it's around like 7:30 or 8 p.m. And so I forgot the second point.
About a tension between like the positives you found in the camp and the experiences in the community that you have in the camp, and staying attuned to the purpose of the camp, the solidarity to people who are suffering and dying.
Yeah, so this is something I had been thinking about a lot, and I think what would happen is potentially over time, sometimes you could find yourself thinking about the camp in a very like internal way, thinking about like all the different working groups and just like discussing like day-to-day things happening in life. But then, for example, something would happen in Gaza or something would happen in the police, and every single time it would just be a complete wake-up call, and you would just see complete revitalizing of everything we were there for in the first place. I don't think there was ever a moment where you could lose sight of what was going on in Gaza. It's so documented. People are always talking about it, talking about the updates. And at times, maybe when there was like drifting into sort of just camp, thinking about camp as an entity in itself rather than part of a larger struggle, there would always be something to bring everyone back to reality. So I think it's always good when political movements do have these like almost false reminders to ground them in reality.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and I think, I mean, not to try and answer my own question for you, but like I was trying to give voice to the kind of nonsense that we would hear in like the British mainstream reactionary press or whatever. And I think that like what's really important to remember is how these structures existing continuously rather than coming together and then disappearing again over and over again, like a protest or a march or whatever, or even an action for that matter. Like while those things, it's like different tactics for different things. And the presence of an ongoing camp means that people are there and they're discussing stuff the whole time and they're present the whole time. And then when there are new developments, they are already there and already engaged, right?
Yeah, I'd say that when you do an action itself, that feels like it's taking ages. An action may only take a day, um, but it's almost like part of the camp would split off, just maybe like 5 or 10 people for some. And that you'd almost get to know those people really well for that one time period. You would do an action. You'd be so focused, obviously, on what you're doing, but then you'd go back and it would just be like the camp was so excellent as just being a base for these actions. That's what for anyone listening, I would like to stress these camps as and what they should be. The camps shouldn't be an end in themselves towards resisting the universities. They are there to organize. Any sort of I'd be weary of believing that the camps just staying there and staying static will do anything, because they won't. The initial time frame in which they'd be there, maybe the first week or the first 2 weeks, that scares the universities, fair enough. But it's what the camps can become, and I think that's what the Manchester Camp of Resistance did well, in cases where other camps potentially stagnated more. And I think it was important that we remembered the national and the international aspect of it. So obviously the international aspect of solidarity across the entire world, and with the people of Gaza. But nationally, we would send lots of money to these other camps to help them start up. And for example, like legal fees for Nottingham University, because everything's interconnected. If one camp sets precedent for the others, it can have such like magnificent effect. People could say, why are you dedicating all this energy to these specific demands against the University of Manchester? Because they may on the surface look quite minimal, but it really is about that like that domino effect onto the other universities. And like that's why the universities are scared. They're scared about this triggering a movement, which it has. The university's contract with BAE Systems is only 820 grand. We've probably cost them more than that in money, but it's about the precedent it sets. So we can perfectly understand from their bourgeois point of view that they want to protect this specific capital to protect all of their capital, because when when the wall crumbles, the entire university will crumble. Obviously, we don't want them thinking that, but that's how we see it.
Yeah, 100%. Can you talk to us a bit about the research that the University of Manchester is doing into graphene warfare? Because that's something that you hear like quite a lot, especially at the camp. But it's, I don't think, something that a lot of people are aware of.
Yeah, personally, I'm not entirely educated on the Graphene Institute and what the university's links are with them personally, just because the camp's been very focused on its demands with BAE systems and the Israeli universities. But we have picketed the Graphene Institute before. There was a university senate meeting in there, and we saw all of the senate members coming out after. It's a very well defended building. They obviously know it's going to be a target, but as for specific details on the university's relationship with the graphene industry, I'm afraid I don't feel like I may.
Yeah, no problem. That's fine. Actually, that like quells my worry that that was going to be a massive long answer, to be honest. But yeah, just so everybody kind of knows, graphene is what is lauded by the defense industry as a wonder material. And we always know how well it goes when capitalism, particularly the military-industrial complex, labels something a wonder material. Things spring to mind like I don't know, napalm, some other stuff, maybe Kevlar. I don't know, shit like that. But essentially, yeah, it's the what I think seems to be the broad consensus is that it would be a material that better facilitates robotics. So I imagine that would be drones. I imagine it would be possibly in a nightmare future to be imagined the Boston Dynamics dogs potentially. I don't know, but essentially it's a type of material that is difficult to be detected by radar. Essentially, so that is kind of like the seems to be the bare bones of it. So if that is the kind of thing that University of Manchester is engaging in, then that's disgusting, really, isn't it? So anyway, okay, cool, no worries on the graphene question. But yeah, I guess just coming back to thinking about the application of a camp and the simultaneous, well, not necessarily simultaneous, but also the additional applications of actions that are pushing for a desired outcome. And I think that what the University of Manchester camp definitely demonstrates is that having this horizontally organized, democratic structure, where, like you say, like there's no hierarchy and people are free to sort of come in as a sort of an autonomous group, really, that puts things, contributes to the cause, and they can obviously like decide, okay, we're going to do this action, these guys are going to do this action, etc., etc., etc. I think that that's like such a good demonstration of having that kind of a structure in, like, well, I'm using the word base camp, and it is a camp, having this base camp for the operations of the organization. It's just, I think, a really, really good example of just solid organizing, I think. This isn't really a question, this is more praise, I'd say.
Yeah. We talked about assemblies on, maybe we can turn this into a question somewhere along the line, but we talked about assemblies a few weeks ago on the show, and I think that I talked about a sort of dissolution reconstitution model of assemblies and organizations where people have space to talk and to develop their ideas, revisit what needs doing, examine the functions and the successes and the failures of organizations, build organizations maybe, and then when they have those spaces to assemble and discuss, they get to change what the organizations are doing. And like the classic anarchist model of like direct action through affinity groups who like do the thing, come together just to do the specific thing, and then they dissolve, right, works best when there is a rich community of people who are discussing all the time. And you said that you've had like some of the best political discussions of your life just hanging out at the camp on the night watch or whatever when you're with some comrades. And I think that like Mule, what you were getting at is that like this is a bit of this like dissolution reconstitution in action, right? Like you've got the assembly, although it's not an organized assembly for structured debate, I guess, and like with chaired like discussion at the camp, you do have a space, a sort of incubator space of people talking and exchanging ideas where the conditions and the ground are fertile for things to grow, and then stuff comes out of it. I'm still failing to turn this into a question.
Yeah, there was what I'll add is that at the beginning of the camp there was, I believe, a vote, or people were really trying to, some were trying to really push us adopting democratic centralism, and to have elected people. And I think at the time I was in favor of it, but since it was rejected, it really has shaped just my political views in general. And I feel like the decentralized structure has allowed, first of all, for just ideas to spawn in anywhere, from anyone who feels like they can have them. Obviously, they don't have to occur if the collective decisions aren't made. But also, it means that the university and the police aren't able to, they're not able to target anyone. And I think that's probably some failures we've seen of a lot of especially Marxist-Leninist organizations in the past, where through like COINTELPRO, for example, the FBI were able to just assassinate the leaders of revolutionary leftist organizations throughout the later 20th century. And I think the camps just, by following the decentralized and more horizontal structure, it's been very effective. Not just because obviously a lot of people make the moral argument for horizontalism, but I think what is neglected is its practical consideration as well.
Yeah, 100%. Like that, it's so powerful for people to be able to operate, perform actions, etc. Not being part of a sort of like having a constitution, or having people's names on pieces of paper and stuff like that, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, absolutely. I fully understand that, and I think that is really what it's about, right? It's about practical organizing in the face of a massively overwhelming system, right? The UK is one of the biggest contributors of support to Israel. Like they have so much, so many ties, so much connection with Israel. Like it's essentially Britain's problem child, as it were, because we essentially like had the mandate that allowed for the colonization of Palestine. I mean, it was already colonized by us, but then it was like, okay, no, specifically these Zionist groups are allowed to go in there. We're going to arm them, and whatever problem that causes for the Palestinians, whatever, that's for them to deal with, actually. So yeah, it's I think really important to recognize, the British state is it's a bit of a problem. I think we all agree it's a bit of a problem, but in terms of it is actually a massive source of power. And if you're going to be organizing against an institution like a university that certainly props up that power by doing things like graphene warfare research, having ties to BAE Systems, having ties to universities in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, occupied Jerusalem. It's a big thing, and I think having that definitely decentralized way of organizing is massively practical, and it's worked. This is the thing; it's worked. You did the thing, you did it that way, and it worked. So absolutely phenomenal stuff. Again, not really a question, more praise. Just sort of gushing, well done, this is great work, good stuff.
I think as well as just the political aspects of the camp, I think what I've learned a lot about is a lot of Palestinian culture through being there, because obviously there are a lot of Palestinians at at the Camp of Resistance. And there would be Palestinian food. I believe on the final day, a lady brought some sweets, and she said, like, this is what they do as it's always as a sign of celebration. Just like small things like that, learning about the people who we are supporting I think is so crucial. Obviously not to appropriate anything they're doing, but just I think just by understanding a culture is an expression of solidarity itself. Just wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, my thoughts in particular that is absolutely something that I know that Palestinian people have said many, many times over. They have given permission for people of any nation really to like spread the word of Palestinian culture, because it's something that they're rightfully so terrified is going to be erased off the face of the earth. Hibawi Kafir, the last Kafir factory in Palestine, they actually link to a statement when some people have said in the past, wearing a kafir if you're a non-Arab is cultural appropriation. Actually, they link to a thing basically explaining that, like, no, actually it's not, especially if you're doing it to support Palestine or to visibly show your support for Palestinian resistance, because we desperately fucking want that. We desperately want people to know that we're resisting one of the most oppressive, brutal regimes in the world. So yeah, I think absolutely, and I think like you know what I mean. Yeah, this is the thing. Like, if in discussions like this, I think it is just always better to like default to, the people who were there. Like, default to Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Palestine itself. And yeah, that's
I'd
their
say
words on
that
it.
I've actually left my kafir in the other room, so I don't have it on me right now. But just wearing that around as an expression of solidarity, like people have, and a lot of people have been doing it, and it can even just start a conversation on the street with someone if you're wearing kafir. I've been told by a few people I know that are maybe more like liberally inclined that that's cultural appropriation, but it was Palestinians that have encouraged people to wear the keffiyeh, and I've been shown by Palestinians how to tie it around my face. And like it is it's not the same as organizing in it by any means. I'm not comparing it to actually doing something, but I think these visible signs of solidarity are important. And it isn't tokenism if it's backed with organization of a movement.
Yeah, it's one thing to kind of like get a keffiyeh from Etsy from like a white woman or something who's like, making them on her own or something, I don't know, and they're like bad and they're not the same or whatever, and then sort of like, maybe go into a protest, and then taking a selfie or something. But if you're wearing a keffiyeh and you're like desperately like trying to like find organizations, at least, like, who do I organize with, what do I do, what can I do for Palestinians, like people who are desperately like seeing actually the sort of I don't want to say ineffectiveness of protests, but I just think like this has been such a broad unifying cause for like a lot of people, and it's brought in so many people of like many different political persuasions. And I think a lot of the time you get like liberals who will go, oh, I know how you change a thing. You do a protest, and they go to these protests week in, week out, week in, week out, and they're just like, oh, it's still happening.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more with you there. I think social media especially is very deluding. A point you said earlier about liberals who will go and just take a photo of protest it's completely real. I I've seen people who I thought were, to be honest, just like very naive of me, people I thought were really engaged in the movement. But then I've been outside a demo where it's the police have been getting quite aggressive, and I've just seen like some of these same liberals who I follow on social media come and just like stand there with their friends and take a photo of it and then just walk off. And then when people do some of the chants that may imply like true resistance to the Palestinians, like they'll just stop chanting and they'll walk off. I think like liberal co-optation of the Palestinian resistance movement is so harmful. And as you're seeing, weeks ago, people were reposting this AI-generated image of Rafah saying "All eyes on Rafah." These are people who haven't done anything for the movement, and it doesn't really like align with them. And like, it's great that people care, but like they could be doing something. They don't have to do much. There really isn't much everyone has to do. But I think just the aesthetic appropriation of resistance in general is something liberalism is really harmful with.
Yeah, like it's you know, in terms of you know, yeah, that one particular image, it harkens back to the Instagram black square of Black Lives Matter, you know, where it's like, just post this like black square, like like what are you saying? Like so bizarrely. No, it definitely, that one definitely had like undertones of racism, like a black square. Like, what are you talking about? But like, you know, this one was super interesting because it's this like confluence of things. It's like the popularization of the Palestinian struggle, which, you know, to be clear, as someone who has, you know, observed and attempted to, as much as I can, like participate in the Palestinian struggle for over 10 years, like it's very good. It's very, very good to see so many people going like, this is bad, actually. I think it's bad. You know, if they're doing that at the very least, it's a lot better than what a lot of people thought was going to happen when they finally, you know, rolled the tanks through Gaza, which we all knew was coming. I think a lot of people just thought it was going to disappear and no one would ever speak about it and it would be a tragedy. In that respect. So I think, you know, it's good in one way to see so many people going, yeah, I think it's bad, but saying, yeah, I think it's bad when people have been saying we know it's bad for months and months and months, and people have been kind of like sat there going like, oh yeah, like it depends, right? It depends. If that's all you're gonna do, yeah, you got to do better. But if people have like been thinking, I need to do something for a long time, and then they were like, you know, they saw what happened in Rafah, and then they've used that as a springboard to do more stuff, then that's great. That's fucking great. But yeah, it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult. Like liberals are like a lot easier people to work with than fascists, right? Like, like this is a fact. We know this. But at the same time, there is a lot of this very deeply frustrating sentiment that comes from like it's a lack of political education, right? It's a lack of politicization in the imperial core.
What this brings up for me is that famous Kwame Ture clip where he's talking about mobilizing and organizing, and you know, I was thinking of this first because you said about liberals going to protests and then that's all they do, right? Like the example that Ture is using when he's talking about mobilizing and organizing, he starts by saying there are all these people who went to the Million Man March for civil rights back in the civil rights movement and told everyone they were there and were really proud of having been there and said over and over again, I was there, I was there, I was there. And he says, you know, well, okay, but then where were you after that? You know, and where were you like the day after that, the week after that, the month after that, the year after that? Because this is the difference between mobilizing and organizing. And he goes into the details of how Martin Luther King was a good mobilizer, but not a good organizer, and didn't build the structural power behind him. And then he says that like sometimes the enemy uses mobilizing to immobilize us, right? Like the more people's energy goes into like showing up for the one thing and then feeling like they've done it, the less their energy is going into showing up for it day after day or week after week and showing up to all the meetings and making the decisions and putting their labor into making things actually change. And it's like, yeah, like it's not enough for us to just be like just talking about it or just posting about it. I'm aware that like, me and Mule, like our role is as informational infrastructure. Like we're doing a thing that's not just a post because we're like actually trying to get people aware of things they can do, right? And other facets of what Red Planet is for. But it's just like when it was going down in Rafah, like loads of people were posting about the fact that loads of people had reposted an AI image that said all eyes on Rafah. And it was just like, you are posting to complain that all people are doing is useless posting, right? And it's like that's the level below just showing up to the protest and taking a picture, right? But like, yeah,
There's also just so much of the discourse online, and I honestly would just say to people, get offline, actually talk to people in the movement. There's so much talking about who's using their platform to talk about Palestine, but that's really not enough. It's not enough to repost. It's not even enough to, like posting information is like good, but it's not good to just say like who's not talking about it. It becomes this sort of like tokenistic battle over who's using their realistically non-existent platform to talk about issues that they're doing nothing for. The conversation has to be shifted to what effective actions can people take.
yeah. If you're going to if you are going to police how people are using their platforms to affect change, then you should have higher standards than that. You should be demanding that people who have big platforms use their platforms to show people they could join Palestine action and go do an action that will shut down an Elbit factory. You should be demanding that people who are leftists who have a bajillion subscribers or whatever, like, show people how they can set up a free food structure in their community and help people. This is why we made Red Planet. Like, this is just it. Like, but and we say, if people like what we do and think they could do it better, they should. And that people should copy us. We don't demand that people use their platform that way. But I'm just like, if you're, yeah, but this is it, right? I'm saying we shouldn't be spending our time discoursing about the discourse now, because then we're just creating another level down of uselessness. But like, it is about what we can do. So I mean, do you have more thoughts on what we can do?
I think just like to your audience, I think as I was saying earlier, and I will keep saying this because I do think it's the most important thing I can contribute today, is please go to your encampment. If you're a student, if you're a non-student, it doesn't really matter. Other than officially, of course. But these are organizing spaces. And to be honest, even if you don't want to protest universities, there are other organizing spaces for you to do this. But these spaces in themselves, the ones that you're seeing slandered as the most radical thing known to man, but on the Zionist media, these are spaces in which you will meet people where you can do true actions, but they are not necessarily, well, they are an action itself, but in such a limited scope that you have to expand upon that. And I think what's been interesting about the camp, and actually something we haven't really spoken about yet, is the various groups involved organizing it, and they all have they're all quite different, but they have worked together really well.
Yeah, so I think we're going to probably move over to questions from the chat, because we're coming towards the end of the time. So firstly, and this is actually on what we were just talking about a second ago, Stephosaurus has asked, how can we help the camp from online and from far away now that it's broken up until September? And I guess expanding that to all camps if people want to help camps specifically.
Yeah, well, okay. Certain steps should be taken, obviously. I'd say like your first step should be like follow your camp's social media and the groups organizing it. For us, it's Manchester Leftist Action and the Manchester Camp for Resistance, but there's also the Youth Front for Palestine, Youth Demand have been heavily, and yeah, lots of other groups. We have a link. It's on chuffed.org. If you go on that website, search Manchester Camp of Resistance, and we'll be on there. I'm sure any other equivalent will have it. But to be honest, even if you donate towards us, if you're not from Manchester, you're still helping the movement as a whole because of this like domino effect I was talking about earlier, and the fact that we are donating to other camps. And to be honest, just give your time if you can. That's probably the most important thing. We have, people have already been very generous in donating us food, tents, etc. But if you're able to, come to do a camp shift just to make sure your camp is safe when they're back next year, of course. Or if you have ideas, just message people and contribute them. It's just small things like this can be really helpful. But to be honest, if you engage in any form of resistance against the British state and against these institutions that are supporting Israel, you'll find the way that you can contribute the best. So I'd say just assess your skill, what you can do to help, and then use them. Sorry if I'm being too vague, but that's all I can really say.
No, I don't think that was vague at all. I think that's, pretty solid. Next up, we got B-Rat, who says, Has there been much cooperation between unions, in brackets, university teaching staff, or just in general, end brackets, and the encampments?
Yeah, so obviously there have been people who've come from both Unite and Unison to the camp to help. The UCU's been great, to be honest. Lots of staff have come. They're usually talking at the demos. One was actually injured yesterday um, at the protest. But yeah, they've been very engaged in the camp. I've met. I've had professors come up to me and just like be like, "Oh, my department's having this event. Maybe you should disrupt it." Just like lots of even just small things like that. But obviously, we've been donated money by unions as well.
Okay. Yeah, so the last question we have from chat is from Vordrella, and it says, there's a lot of manufacturing consent going on in the media in terms of painting these protests as bad. Is there any advice or active things that can be done to counter this, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think to be honest, what we've mostly had is media silence in our case. What I would say, if you're from Manchester, avoid Manchester evening news. They are terrible. So we moved the camp to Oxford Road, and they took a photo of the two tents we hadn't moved and used that as their front image. Very misleading. Most of the news has been like fine. To be honest, we can tend to be somewhat strict in who we talk about. Talk to, because for example, someone like Good Morning Britain they would spend the whole segment saying, "Do you condemn Hamas?" And then just try and accuse you of all sorts of things. But I'd say, to be honest, if you're on social media, make sure on Instagram that you have. So this was done automatically recently. It's automatically set to filter political content. Turn that off because it is just blatant suppression of left-wing voices. Follow your local Palestinian resistance movement. Then you'll see all the information you can about the demos, etc. But yeah, the media. I'm going to be honest. The media hasn't been great. Try and find a good left-wing, local or national media outlet that you can look into. Real News is great, for example. I've spoken to them, and obviously, like this is been a great place to discuss. So yeah.
Buzzing. That's fantastic. Okay, so I think we're going to end a little bit earlier than usual this show. But thank you so much for coming on, Molotov. It's been really, really good.
Yeah,
It's been really, really valuable. Yeah, no, our pleasure. Absolutely. We normally, at the end of a discussion, ask our guests to suggest some homework for our listeners, but I think you've probably already given like a couple of different examples of homework of what people can do, unless you want to add anything else in there.
No, I think I've pretty much said everything I could say, to be honest. Yeah, thank you both of you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for coming.
No problem.
Thank you.
Solidarity, and I look forward to the camp starting up again in September.
Solidarity. See you in September. Bye.
See you later. Bye-bye. Well, that was incredible.
Yeah,
great stuff.
Good show.
Good stuff. Yeah, I think that I would like to know where I can find more Sophie.
That's right. So support the show. You can go to patreon.com/red_planet. We aren't doing full details of all the pledges, but the important thing is that at the highest tier, you do get a personal thank you on every episode. So thank you to our sickos. That's what that tier is called. If you want to know about the other tiers, you're just going to have to go patreon.com/red_planet. Thank you to our sickos, JBP, Queen Pib, Cassie Tastrophe, and Risk Inverse. You're helping make the show possible. But if I don't just want to support the show, but I individually want to support the hosts, my darling mule, where can people go support you?
It's linktree.ee/DJ Mule. That's the end of it.
Thanks. Yep, that's cool. Then I'll quickly also shout out the other linktree.ee's, which our other two hosts who aren't present today are KiraChats and Conquest of Dread. I believe that Tim's one is linktree.ee/Conquest of Dread. I'm checking the chat to see if someone corrects me on that, but I know that Kira's one is linktr.ee/KiraChats. And yeah, if you want to support me, it's linktr.ee/Sophie from Mars. I'm just being informed. Tim's one is Dread Conquest. linktr.ee/Dread Conquest. Mine is Sophie from Mars, all one word. There's my Patreon on there. You can also send me money directly. I've been really financially struggling recently, and I've been getting help from friends to afford my HRT and my bills and my groceries. And I'm going to be back from hiatus to publish videos again soon, and then that's when my income will be able to like properly go back up, because I'll be making videos and people will see them and I'll get money again and not be worried about being homeless. But if you want to support me through the hiatus and bridge the gap, please check out my links. They're at linktr.ee/Sophie from Mars. Is there anything else, Mule, or are we
No.
just done?
I'm
Great.
done.
Fab.
I'm fucking done.
Let's fuck off.
Bye.
Bye.